Chandrasekhar for inviting me, for sharing some of the experience that I gained while working with Sandy on research, basically how to develop manuscript. So just to give short introduction of Sandy, where I work, it's a South Asian network for environment and development economics. Mainly works with researchers from the region to enhance their research capacity related to issues such as like environment, health, development, these kind of things. Environmental issues, basically, that the region has been facing. So we provide research support like grants, mentoring, technical support, and also organize a lot of trainings for researchers, including very long summer school over 3 weeks residential course. And Chandrasekhar has been one of the researchers who came to Sandy. He got grant and he has a lot of publications out of it. So that's how we actually met. So very glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So what I'm going to do today is sharing some of the learnings from over the years that I gained from Sandy. So let me share my screen with you. Let me see where it is. Okay. I can't see right now what I wanted to share. Let me check. I hope I can share it. Okay. So can you see my screen? Is it visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
yes,
all right.
Sir. It is visible.
So before
Yes,
I start, so I just want to show one slide here.
Yes, it is visible.
Oh. All right, so this is the cover page of the book that we have been working with. Chandra also has a chapter here. So this book is coming out in a month as an open access on climate change and community resilience insight from South Asia. So it has 27 papers from all 7 South Asian countries. So I'm one of the editors and also contributors for this volume. So if you're interested in these kind of things, just please watch this out, and it will be out in a month and open access, so you can easily download and use it for your study, for your teaching, for your research, if you are in this field. All right, so let's think about what are the components of good writing? Good manuscript means good writing, right? So first of all, writing a manuscript requires a lot of thinking. If you are a good thinker, if you organize your thoughts very, very well, that actually helps develop scholarship, which is a function of 2 things. One is how to analyze things. For example, if you have the data, how to analyze it. And once you have the good analysis, and you also need to write it nicely. And that collectively, brings out a good manuscript. So it's putting a lot of ideas together into a shape so that it becomes a readable, clear storyline along the line. So it's like a skill that can be learned like softwares. You are all from IITs and you guys are learning a lot of softwares, right? So maybe statistical computer softwares, all kind of things. So writing is also kind of things that can be learned, okay? But it's a slow process, meaning once you start writing, it's a bit by bit, like 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs a day. If you can write 1 page a day, that's a lot, because you can finish your manuscript in a month. But that is maybe still a lot, writing a page per day. Okay, so think of writing as a very slow process, a paragraph a day maybe, or 2 paragraphs. So thinking about very coherently. And also, you also have other professional obligations. You cannot just write whole day and every day, right? So it's a bit by bit, doing other things. So you should set aside a little bit of time and think about it and write. So So good, basically what you want to see in a good manuscript, there are few things, but I'm putting few things. For example, it should have very clear message or research questions. What questions you are asking in your manuscript. That should be very sharp and clear. If your question is not clear, and rest will also not be clear, okay? So research question is the most fundamental element of your manuscript. So you should work very, diligently hard to come up with the very sharp, focused research questions. Once question is like a settled, and then it is like, what methods to be used, what kind of analysis you are going to do, what data, and then linking all these things logically, right? Your questions to methods to analysis, all kind of things. So it requires a logical and a linkage also, okay? And most importantly, when you say manuscript, we might be thinking, very, very hard, some technical stuff. So of course, it may be technical, but in essence, you are actually telling a story, okay? So writing manuscript is actually telling a story to the audience, right? So it has different components, but think about you are telling a good story to somebody, and what are the elements of that story? We'll discuss about what are the key elements. And also the style of writing also matters. So the formula, the mantra is, write in such a way that it makes the reader want to read it, right? So that's how the writers actually want to write, so that people can feel like, interesting. So once they start reading, they should continue reading it, okay? So it should be attractive, meaning good reading to the reader, whoever wants to spend their time. It should be very, very interesting. Oh, here is very big noise outside. Just excuse me. This guy is like, I don't know what he comes to collect something outside. Okay. So another element is like when we write, basically in social science, maybe also true to science, and these days, people do multidisciplinary research. So even if you're doing a science research, somehow you may want to link it to the human. So always think about you're writing for like somebody, right? Meaning how you say and what you say depends on who you are writing for, meaning your audience. Who are your audience? So the formula is, pick a person, somebody who, what you can say is the representative person for your discipline, and talk about your paper as a story, right? So that's the idea, telling a story in a good way so that it becomes very interesting, okay? So you should have that in your mind when you start writing a manuscript. All right. So, and if you have any questions, please let me know. You raise your hand or put your questions in the chat. So maybe I should also open the chat box on the side so that I can see. Okay. All right. So I'll pause time to time and ask if you have any questions, okay? All right. So basically, before writing, you need to decide what the paper is about, okay? Meaning, you might have a lot of issues in your mind, when, let's say you're doing your PhD, and you are thinking of many questions, many things, many issues. But manuscript, when you write, you should actually discuss very selective, very few issues, most probably one issue in a paper. Meaning, if you can come up with the right question, one question is enough for one manuscript, okay? So initially, as a PhD scholar, you might start with several issues, several questions, very broad ideas, all kind of things. And you start, analyzing your data. You may have a lot of tables and graphs, all kind of things. And you need to sit back and think about, out of that, what is the most important ideas? What is the most interesting research questions that you want to address in your first manuscript? If you have 3 interesting ideas, you have 3 papers. You should write 3 manuscripts. Okay, so that's the idea. Don't put many things in one paper. That will actually dilute the strength of your paper. It won't be a good paper if you want to plug in different things in one paper. So the mantra, the formula is pick one issue, formulate your questions very, very, very strongly, sharp questions, and develop the methods. If you want to answer 2 questions in one manuscript, think about you may need 2 different methodologies, right? 2 different methods, and that might itself be diluting your paper. Okay, so the idea is to discuss, pick up one interesting issue, formulate research questions, and think about that particular issue in one paper. Okay, and then what question you want to answer in the paper, it actually dictates everything. What methods you are going to use, what data you are going to use, and how to analyze your data, and what kind of other issues, what policies, all kind of things that will come out from your research. Okay, so basically, before doing all these things, you need to review your literature to find the research gaps. So once you find the gaps, your research actually should fill in the gap and whichever is most interesting to you as a researcher. Okay, so you should decide which one is most interesting to you and pick one issue at a time. Okay, all right. So if you put a lot of things in your research, what happens is if people actually don't find those relevant, and then they will be ignored. Your information, whatever you are providing, people actually ignore it because you are not focusing. You are putting too many things, too much, information, too many ideas in one paper. So that is not leading to anywhere coherently. So reader actually confused when they read that kind of papers. In our part of the world, in South Asia, these research trainings are, people write differently, and we tend to write actually too much in a paper. Okay, that is my experience working in the region over the past almost 15 years. Okay, so if you put a lot of things in one paper, people will actually divert you somewhere else. You want to do something, and you'll end up doing something else because reviewers will ask other questions. They will ask to divert your paper somewhere else. And if you are coherent, if you have very focused research questions, that chance will be very, very low. Okay, you can do whatever you want from the beginning if you are actually focused in your research questions and your methods. Okay. So the key point here is just provide enough information, but don't provide any irrelevant information in your manuscript when you write it. All right. So the basic outline of a manuscript. So you have introduction, right? So you discuss the situation about the issue that you are discussing. You are interested to do research. You identify the problem. You ask the question. And you also, discuss about the response, how that can be actually addressed. So overall, what we are looking at is about 1 to 2 page introduction, not more than 2 page. Okay, that means you really need to think very hard what to put in that 2 page long introduction. You might have many ideas, and you need to filter it out and put the very, very essential ideas, because when you write manuscript and send it out for review, every dot counts. The reviewer will look at very carefully. If you're putting something that is not necessary, those kind of things, the value of your manuscript will definitely go down. Okay, so you need to be very, very careful what to put in there. And then after introduction, the methodology, another important element of your manuscript. So it can be 2 to 3 pages, a little bit more than your introduction. Okay. And the third thing is, what data you are using. Are you using secondary data already collected? or you are using your own primary data. So discuss about this study area and how you are going to collect the data, or how you have collected your data, okay? Depending on what data you're using. Maybe about a page, not too much. And the analysis is the longest. So 4 or 5 pages of your analysis, how you have done it, what kind of model, how you run it, all kind of things. And then summary and conclusion, maybe 1 page. So we're looking at like a 10+ pages of the text. So here I'm not counting like a tables and graphs, as you may have 4 or 5 tables, you may have 3 or 4 graphs. So in total, as beginners, researchers, if you can come up with the 7,000 to 8,000 words manuscript, that can be around 20 pages, depending on how many tables, graphs you are putting, but 20, 25 pages, and depending on one single space versus double space. So if a single space is like a 10+ pages, 15 pages, okay? So instead of page, maybe word count, maybe a better indicator. So journals actually have a limits these days, okay? Most of the journals actually recommend you to write about 7,000 to 8,000 words manuscript. And there are a few journals who don't have like a much limits, but of course, if you write too much, if there is no need to write a lot, you should not be doing that, okay? So we should always think about how to be very economical, writing less and saying more. That requires a lot of thinking, a lot of reading, a lot of review of the existing literature and finding the gaps, sharpening your research questions, analyzing your data from different angles, and then writing it, putting it together, okay? As how you are telling a story to the people who actually don't know about the subject. All right, so let me pause here and see if there are any questions. So please unmute yourself if you have any questions. Anything, any questions? It's like I'm just, speaking with the screen. Nobody is here, so. Hello?
Yes, sir, it is audible.
Yeah, is there any questions so far?
Sir, no, thank you.
All right, so if you have any questions, please let me know. Because I want to hear from you what you think about, when you write, if you have some experience already, okay? All right, let's move on. Okay, so here is a sample introduction, okay? When you write introduction, it's what I said, it's very coherent, very consistent, but short, very short, right? So it should consist 4 things: situation, problem, question, response. So here, very few lines, I'm giving you an example how you should actually approach your research, when you write your introduction. So situation, let me read it here. Trees in government protected forest are cut down by villagers for use as firewood and for sale in the local market. Despite high expenditure on deploying armed guards, forests are therefore threatened with destruction as cutting rates exceed plantation. So these 3.5 lines, right? How many sentences are there? There are 2 sentences actually. It gives very clear picture of the situation, what is happening in the ground, what is the issue at hand, okay? It's about deforestation and why people are cutting trees, because, even though there are forest guard, government putting a lot of money for guarding the forest, but, people are still cutting it for okay? And why they do it? The problem is here, forest is the only source of firewood for poor villagers, and fuel features high price in the market. Poor villagers have no incentives to manage forest, and government forest management has failed, okay? So the problem in 3 lines is very clear. What is the problem? There are 2 sentences here. Villagers need firewood because there is no other alternative fuel for them. And it also pays a high price in the market, right? So they have no incentive for protecting forest, and government management has been paid. That's the problem, right? So what's the question here, research question? The question is, could villagers be given incentive to manage forest through joint ownership ventures with government, right? So can some incentive given to the village help addressing this issue, right? So the question is very, very clear, given the problem and the situation. And then response, when I go, what you are going to do in your research, right? So this study will examine whether new joint forest management scheme have been successful in reducing illegal cutting of trees, right? So that's your research objective, given everything. You want to examine that, how the new incentive, where villagers are given some sort of management responsibility for managing forest, if that helps reducing the deforestation. Okay. So the main message is, like, once you do your research, data and everything, you already have the research, the results. So what is your key results? You also should indicate in your introduction, because academic writing is not like a writing mystery novel. Things should be clear up front in your introduction. Okay. What is the issue? What you're doing? What problems you're addressing? What is the question? Right. What kind of data you have used, what methods you have used, and also what is your key findings. Okay, so all these components should be in your introduction. Okay, any questions on this one? And you expand a few things here and there, and 1.5 page introduction is not too bad. It's reasonable length. And if you really need much, like, go for 2 pages. Okay, but not more than that, because people will not read very long things these days. There, the flooding of these ideas and papers and research and all kind of things. And if you want to write a very effective manuscript, it should not be too long. Okay. All right. So let's move on to another slide here. In your introduction, just the expansion of what I said, right? So you need to discuss the situation actually in your introduction, and then what is the a link of the situation that you're studying with the theory or empirical ideas, right? Your research problem and then theoretical ideas and then empirical issues should be linked together. So research problem here is what? The deforestation issue, how to address it. And what the theory says. Theory says, if you give incentive to people, they will listen to you. Incentive matters, incentive works. That's the whole idea behind the economics. Economics is all about designing the right incentive to the people so that they behave properly. Okay, so hands is raised. So Chandra, please. You want to say something? Hello?
Yeah, it's audible? It's audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to request to Dr. Mani, if you could tell them, some of the students, that how attractive they should write the title and abstract.
Yeah, that is coming. That is coming.
Okay. So that will be a little bit helpful for them.
No.
Sometimes
those things are coming, okay, in my later slides.
Yeah. Okay.
I have all the components.
Questions, I think some of the in the chat box.
Yeah. I have those things in later slides.
Okay.
Okay, so just wait for a few minutes.
Okay. Now some questions are already raised in the chat box.
Okay, so let me see first. Okay. So let me
difference between situation and problem. What is the difference between situation and problem?
Okay. Okay, let me see. Situation and problem, question. What else? Okay, that's it. So let me go back to the earlier slide. So let's see what's the difference between these two boxes. Let's look at it. Situation is what people are doing. Okay? What they are doing. What they are doing is villagers are actually, cutting down the trees. That's not the problem. That's the situation that is happening there. Okay? So despite putting forest guard and spending a lot of money, villagers are actually cutting down trees. Therefore, these forests are threatened, meaning the cutting rate is much more higher than the plantation or the regeneration rate. So there's a chance of deforestation. That's the situation. So the problem is why they are doing it, why they are cutting. That's the problem, okay? Because the problem for villagers is not having alternative to the firewood. They don't have a choice. That's the problem, okay? So if they have choice like LPG or other biogas or other substitute, they may cut less trees, right? So the problem is they don't have it. So they have no incentive to protect the forest because they have no other substitute for firewood. Okay, is that clear? So one is actually giving what is happening on the ground, and second is telling why they are actually doing it. What's the problem for the villagers? If they don't cut the tree, what happens? Okay, it's very thin line between these things. But if you can actually formulate your introduction with some sort of a structure, that helps a lot. So that's the idea. Okay. All right. So let's move on to. Are there any other questions? Does that answer your question, whoever? Let me see. Priyanka Gupta. Is that okay? Clear? You can unmute yourself when you speak. All right. Okay, so let's move on to still we are in introduction, just to expand what we said in the earlier slide. So there should be a link between the problem, what you're addressing, with theoretical ideas, what the literature says about incentive, how you can actually address, and also what is the empirical issue that you are addressing. Okay, so there should be a clear link between these different components. So, for example, if a problem is about biogas adoption in India, if biogas is given to the villagers, if they can adopt biogas, maybe they cut less trees, right? So if you're writing a paper on the biogas adoption, so you start with the need to clean energy in your introduction, a link to climate change, because that's the issue everybody is facing right now, and also human health, because if you burn firewood inside a home with not so much good ventilation, so it will generate indoor air pollution. People face health problem, all kind of things. And you bring in those statistics, those numbers, what is happening in India, right? So you identify your problem that you want to study. You bring in the issue first, okay? So if the problem is about, let's say, regulation in the textile sector, so you discuss with the compliance issues, how regulations are complied by the firms, and how problematic it is to enforce the regulations in country like India or Pakistan or Nepal, in South Asia, okay? And also what environmental problems we are facing because of the lack of enforcement of the regulations, okay? So these are very important issues. You should highlight the key challenges, that issues that we're facing if you want to study. These are some examples, okay? And you may have something else in your mind. So you need to link with what you are thinking. Okay. All right. So when you discuss about situation, the suggestion is include only essential elements, essential information. For example, like, you include population density only if it is necessary for your study, or if it influences the behavior of the population or the sample that you are studying, okay? Maybe you don't need latitude, longitude of the place where you are studying, depending on what questions you're asking and what is the situation there. Is latitude, longitude part of the problem? Does it help to address your issues? Otherwise, you should not be bringing unnecessary information. That's the only thing I'm trying to say, okay? I may be picking some information here, like a population density, latitude, longitude, but these are just the indicated. The point is, you should not be putting information that is not relevant, okay? Also, if you want to provide some statistics to make your case, just provide very few key numbers. Don't dump everything that you know about the problem, okay? Pick something that is very representative of the problem, that actually gives the problem, the clear picture what is happening in the study area, okay? Meaning be very selective in terms of providing your information, because you have 1.5 page or maximum 2-page space to discuss your introduction. So if you discuss many things, you are losing others, right? There is a trade-off. So select what is most important, and that makes sense also. All right. So when you discuss the problem, you provide some evidence, enough evidence to show that there is a problem. Again, but don't put too many things. Okay. For example, if you're studying industrial pollution, right? In like a water pollution kind of thing. So you can just give one number here, for example, river pollution in industrial zones is, let's say, 15% higher than average. So that already tells a lot of things. This is a very polluted area, right? And to support this, you might be writing a few more lines, few sentences, providing some supporting documents, and you cite the reference right there where you are getting this number. If you just say, 15% higher or 20% higher without very good reference, that will not make your claim, authentic or believable. So the reviewer, whoever reviews your paper, will actually look at what supporting evidence you are actually citing there to make your case. Okay. So literature review is another side. I'm not covering today in literature review, but it comes everywhere. So you should be thinking about already, whatever claim you make, you need to provide good reference. So just let me just add one thing here. In these days, if you look at manuscript written earlier, you can see the literature review section. But these days, if you look at manuscript published these days, you don't see separate literature review section. Okay, so things are changing. You put your literature review actually everywhere. You support your claim using different literature, already existing reference, okay? So that you don't have to actually go back and do another section on literature review, okay? So maybe that is covered by somebody in other sections. I'm not going to cover today. So in your story, when you make your case, so possible cause and effect, relationship between the variables. Right? For example, in industrial this water pollution case, if there were more inspections, more people can inspect what factories are doing, factories would release clean water, right? So that's the cause and effect. So you should be studying the impact of this enforcement or the inspections. Sorry, inspection, not infections, right? So you can actually study the impact of inspections. If you increase the frequency of monitoring, can that help reduce the water pollution in the given area, in the given river, or in the given watershed? Okay. There is some background. Could you please mute your mic? Hello? And I can also have some background noise here. The dog is barking outside, so sorry for that. That's not under my control. It's somewhere outside. So let's look at the research questions.
I have muted him. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So some background was there, noise. So your research question is like the most important element of your, overall manuscript. If question is not interesting, people don't read it. Okay. So you need to formulate your question very carefully so that it becomes very interesting, because that actually dictates many things, including other ideas in the paper that you put, the way you organize your paper, the different sections, the method that you choose, the data you use, and the way you analyze and the way you write, all actually depends on how you formulate your research questions, because the goal of writing paper is to address that research questions, right? So I can't emphasize more how important it is to come up with very, very coherent, very sharp, very, very, clear research questions, okay? So you may have, you are a PhD scholar working for 3 years, so you may have something when you start your PhD program. And you always need to go back and see whether your research questions is still relevant. And you should always reformulate it differently so that it becomes sharper and sharper and sharper, okay? And that can be different from what you started originally, and that's fine if it gets better. So don't be afraid of changing your research questions if it requires, okay? As I said earlier, one question is enough for a paper, but it should be very sharp, clear, focused, okay? And the suggestion is you don't need questions and objectives together. If you have research questions, your objective is to address that question, right? So your question is one and the objective other side. Sometimes, people write those kind of things and mismatched. And that's the reason why, papers get rejected from the journals, all kind of things. So if you have good research questions, you don't have to say, I have 3 other objectives to do, right? So that's the another important element of the issue that you need to think about. Questions here about the research questions? Do we have anything here in the chat box? Okay, let me check. How to avoid repetition of sentence in various subheadings? Wow, that's very interesting question, because when you write in the beginning, you might be saying same thing after 2 pages, right? So that's the reason why I said writing is a slow process. Write slowly, write 1 paragraph today, and come back tomorrow, look at it, and then write another paragraph, right? So that you connect those things. You have to have the connection between what you wrote yesterday and what you're going to write today, but not repeating the same thing. That's an art of writing, and it is learned over time, right? It's a skill that you need to develop over time. So going frequently, revisiting what you have written, and then editing it is the way of avoiding the repetitive sentences. Okay. All right. So can graph be used in introduction section in order to provide evidence of current situation? As I said earlier, when you develop your manuscript, you are actually telling a story, right? And provide you are providing graph because you are telling something, right? So pick some numbers from the graph. So for example, let's say the adoption of LPG is very high in India. And you tell how high it is. You don't have to give how the graph is moving. It was 30% 5 years back, now 60% today. So it went up from 30 to 60% 5 years. So you can write a sentence there without a graph. So generally, so don't put graphs, tables, anything in your introduction. Okay, that's the general idea, general suggestion. So people might be putting it, I don't know, but that's in general, people don't put it. Okay, at least in social science research. All right, but that's very good, good question. Thank you, Mona Lisa. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next slide, what I have here. Okay. Still research questions, because this is very important. I'm spending so much time about research questions. Okay, because this is very important. So ask simple but relevant question. So don't make it very complicated. Okay? And think about yourself once you formulate a question, is it answerable? Questions should be always answerable, right? So is it relevant? And for whom? Right? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the group that are interested in this kind of research or the question? And you also need to look at, has it been already studied? Meaning you have to have very good idea of literature review. What is already there? Okay? So if you don't have that thorough review of the literature, you will not be able to find out the gaps. And you don't have research gap, you can't have good research questions, right? Or the relevant research questions. So you need to think of whether that type of questions has been already studied. It can be studied maybe when you look at it, you should be thinking about the global literature these days, not just if it is done in India, right? So things may be similar. For example, adoption of the biogas. People behave maybe similar way in South Asia. If things, research is done in Pakistan or Nepal or Bangladesh, you should refer those literature also. It's not just what is done in India. And go beyond your region, country region, look at what is happening in Africa, what is happening in Latin America and other countries. Okay, so that's how you find the gap in the literature. And then also think about, will it allow you to examine economic choices? Because I'm an economist, of course, so the focus is on how economists actually do research, but this actually applies to other disciplines also. And also, if you're doing multidisciplinary research, it actually helps. Okay? So again, your research questions should allow you to formulate behavioral hypotheses. And the hypotheses are just the statements about behavior, and that can be tested. All right? Okay, so let's move on. So here are a few research questions. Let's look at this, whichever is in the right side, the big box here. So I have two things here, okay? So one is, what are the economic costs of extreme events in Kerala over the last 100 years? That's one question. Versus, what are the extreme events in Kerala over the last 100 years? So what do you think, which question you should pick out of these two? Or what is your thinking about these two questions? Any thoughts about?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
I would pick the first question because the first question can answer the two things. First thing is, what are the events that are occurring in Kerala, and what are the economic costs associated with it?
Okay, very good thinking, actually. So what we actually do, basically I review about 400 plus proposals every year in Sandy, coming from 10 countries in the region. And sometimes people put a lot of research questions, like the second question here. What are the extreme events? This is actually not research questions. This is the background information you should be knowing already when you write your research proposal. Okay, it should not be objective. Okay, it's the background you should be doing anyway, and you should not be telling this one of the objectives. All right. So we should be avoiding this kind of thing. You need to find out whether that is something you need as a background of your study. If something is needed as a background, that cannot be your objective or the research questions. Okay. So same thing here. The first one is like, what are the economic costs of extreme events in Kerala, right? And similarly, there are two other questions. Does local access to infrastructure funds contribute to improve embankment in Sundarbans? So this is the research questions. But if you want to say, I want to examine what are the sources of funding for improving embankment in Sundarbans, that is just the background question. That should not be your research questions. Okay? So there is a distinction between what is background information and what is actually the analysis that you need to do to understand or get the answer of your questions. Okay? And the third one here is indoor air pollution contributing to a decline in cheap labor productivity? So this is also research questions. So these are very simple. See how simple these questions are, very clear. So when you write your proposal or manuscript, you should think of formulating your question as questions. Okay, and very clearly so that people can understand what exactly you want to do. Sometimes people finish reading, introduction, they have no clue what actually the researcher is trying to do because they forget to formulate the research questions properly. Okay. All right. So any questions on these things before moving on? All right, so if I don't hear any noise, I'll move on. So now look at the outline now, okay? So outline, when you finish your introduction at the end, people tend to write, okay, this paper, in section 2, I'll do, the literature review in section 3, methods, research methodology and data collection and analysis and all kinds of things, right? So that should just give you some sort of aid. It should not be dictating what you do. And you can go back and change your outline whenever you want, okay? And sometimes people don't actually write it. But this is basically an optional thing these days. You may or may not want to write outline of your paper in your manuscript, okay? So now let's look at the theory. When you write your theoretical section after introduction, theory basically is a conceptual framework. What you're doing, what is the idea behind it, okay? So when you write your conceptual framework, you should actually tell a story. What behavior you are going to study in your paper. So it should come up as a framework. It can be, the flow chart. Sometimes people develop flow diagram to say what conceptual framework they are using. Economists tend to use complicated mathematics for deriving their theory, all kinds of things. I have some slides later on what you should be doing, what you should be avoiding, okay? And then this literature review, I don't recommend doing as a separate, but it should come in the introduction, in your theoretical framework, everywhere, depending on which section you are working on. You should always take reference of what has been done already, right? So, but you need to always, in your introduction, I still talk about, what does your work build on, meaning the earlier literature, and then what is your evaluated, what you're adding up, okay? And about hypothesis, these are very simple statements, short sentences, but should be tested. Maybe using econometric methods. If you are doing that kind of research, if you are not in econometrics, you might have other ways of addressing, testing those hypotheses. Okay. All right. So let's look at the mathematical models. The suggestion is don't develop your own mathematical model unless you are 100% sure what you are doing. Sometimes what people do is they see like, these models in other papers and they try to like, imitate what other people have been doing. And the suggestion is don't do it, just refer to what they have done. Okay, and you write your framework as a story, why you are using that particular framework, because that helps to address your research questions. Okay, and when you write your equation, use equation editor, because that makes your equation very clear. Sometimes we just type in plain text. That doesn't help to improve the quality of your manuscript. So the suggestion is using math types or equation editor or anything that you can use for writing equations. Okay, and if you have many questions, number them and refer in your text so that the reader can get very easily with questions you're talking to. And also be consistent in writing symbols. So basically, the text and the things that you write in mathematical equations should differ a little bit. For example, here I'm saying xj in italic, not like this capital X. If you are putting some variables, describing variables, so put italic for variables, okay? So that readers can actually look at and say, oh, this is variable and this is a part of the text. Very easy, distinction between those two. Okay, so what is the difference between theoretical framework and literature review? Very big difference, right? So theoretical framework is a theory that you're using to answer your questions. For example, let's go back to our earlier deforestation story there. So what is the theory there? What is the framework that you want to use for your research? So basically, let's think about a framework. So you need to understand what people do as a household. They use several things, right? Food, clothes, many things, and they eat, and they need energy for cooking. And energy might have different choices: LPG, electricity, biogas, and firewood, right? You should bring all those things together, and then if you don't have other choices, what would you do? You extract firewood from the forest, right? So one way of addressing your question, addressing the deforestation, is providing alternatives. So that is your framework in your research. And see if villages where the LPG is accessible has less deforestation rate. You can always test if households have access to alternatives. Are they extracting less firewood from the forest? Okay, so that's the framework, right? But literature review is what has been done to answer that question already. What is there in the literature? What does the literature say? And you need to look at that and how they have done it, how they have addressed that question, and then what research, what answer they got, and how you are doing it different. Because when you do research, the basic idea is you should be able to indicate what is the value added of your research. Value added meaning what new things you are doing. Okay. If you don't know what is already there, and you don't know what will be the new thing, right? Whatever you are doing, you may be thinking that is new, but that may not be true because everybody is doing research and that question may have been already addressed. So you need to dig that down and find out whether that is already done or not, right? And that's the review of literature. And there's a big difference between those two things. Yeah, theoretical and conceptual framework, this is basically the same thing, okay? They are very linked. So when you say, like, what is your theory? The theoretical ideas and conceptual framework. When you say conceptual framework, you might be thinking of like a flowchart or some sort of diagram, right? But it's the same thing as the theoretical ideas, and it is coming from the theoretical ideas, the framework, which is linking what? And the direction goes from X to Y to Z, right? So that is coming from the theory, but you can actually show in a diagram how it is, linked together. Okay. But sometimes it is difficult to distinguish between a theoretical framework and the conceptual framework. Okay, that can be, you are referring to the same thing sometimes. So it is not just science, it's art, basically. Doing research, it requires a science, a lot of training, but also it's also an art. Okay. So the suggestion is, do not discuss well-known concept in your theory. So meaning, don't try to copy from textbooks and put in a paper. Some derivation, some like, the Foster conditions, some demand, like, utility maximization, if you are from economics, okay? Just refer to those papers or the books. And generally, people don't actually use books as a reference unless those are actually based on the research, okay? So textbooks are rarely cited in the paper, unless they are the classics, okay? Same thing with the footnote. Don't try to put very, like, meaningful things in the footnote. If something is relevant, but not too relevant to your text, and go to the footnote. Otherwise, you put in the text instead of putting something in that footnote. Okay, when you write. All right. So once you have everything, you have the research questions, you already did the introduction, you now have the theoretical ideas, literature review already, and you identify the gap, everything, and you know what contribution you are going to make. Now you need the data, right? So you discuss about your study area. As I said, you don't need to discuss irrelevant information like longitude, latitude, soil qualities, those kind of things. You don't need, maybe. It depends what you're doing again, but most of the time we don't need these kind of information. And always good to show maps of your study area if it is available, right? So if you have somebody who knows GIS in your team, ask to prepare a map for the study area. That helps a lot to understand, where it is, what is the situation, all kind of things. And map, of course, should be clear, your legends, all kind of things. And discuss about if you are collecting your own data, or if you have collected your data, you discuss how you have done it. Or if you are doing like already collected survey data. For example, India has, a lot of survey data like NSSO and like, DHS, other human development something. There is another data set that India collects, and census. There are many data sets, and you can actually use those existing data sets for your research. And in your data section, you need to describe what data you're using, how those were collected, and all kinds of things, right? How the sampling was done, it is nationally representative, sample size, all kinds of things. And if you are doing yourself, you collected your data, you discuss a little bit about how you collected it, what were the main variables in your, the sections in your questionnaire, all kinds of things, okay? And once you have data, you always need to report your summary statistics, which is a part of data. Right, and that's not the result. Sometimes when we see tables, we actually attempted to say, oh, this is my result, right? So basically these simple tables, statistics, summary statistics, mean, standard deviation, all kinds of things, these are not actual results, right? Because you haven't analyzed the data. These are just, you are just reporting what the data is about, okay? What is the mean? What is the dispersion around the mean? The standard deviation, all kinds of things. So, so any questions about the data? You have any experience of doing your own research on survey or using some secondary data? Anything? Yes, no? All happy? Clear? Not clear?
Sir,
Questions?
sir, I have a question
Yeah, please.
about the equation editor.
Uh-huh.
Yes, sir. Sir, मैं हिंदी में बोल सकता हूँ ज़्यादा?
I don't understand Hindi much, but go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. सर मैंने एक मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट बना रहा था और उसमें वर्ड में मैंने इक्वेशन एडिटर यूज करके कुछ लिखे थे और मेरा गाइड के पास यानी कि मेरा जो रिव्यूअर है उनके पास मैंने भेजे थे। तो मेरा जो कंप्यूटर में विंडोज है उनका दूसरा है, तो उनके पास जाने से वो सब इक्वेशन इधर उधर हो गया, जिसके वजह से सर को प्रॉब्लम आया। Sir, can you give me some suggestion about that when we are using Word and using equation editor? How to rectify?
Yeah, there are two things that you can do.
Yeah.
One is you can convert your Word file to PDF file.
Yes, sir.
And that will do the job, because that will anybody can read PDF file if they have that the Adobe or other like readers, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The second thing is you can copy your equation and paste as a what do you call it? Not the text, but the map or something.
Yes, sir.
Picture.
No, sir.
Picture format. You can make that one equation as a picture so that it won't change when your guide looks at in his computer.
Yes, sir. Yes,
there would not be any version problem if you do that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
And whichever is good for you, you can choose. And there may be other approaches also. I'm just telling two things.
Sir, if I converted to PDF file and then next send to my guide, so how they will be corrected? That means scrutinize it. Can it process?
Oh, PDF also has a lot of features. They can edit it in PDF.
Yes, sir.
They can put a lot of comments, all kinds of things, but it depends on how good they are in using those technologies.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And if you want to send in Word files, of course, you can just copy that your equation and paste as a picture.
Yes.
Maybe that's a better way.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And it won't change when you have different versions of the software.
Yes, sir. Yes. That's
okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. In case research, is it necessary to have a literature review? So when you say research, you are doing something, you're adding some knowledge to the already existing body of knowledge. So that means you have to have the idea of what has been done already. Okay. So literature review is actually a necessary component of your research. Okay. I'm talking about the academic research. So there may be other types of research. If you want to write something in newspaper, you may not need to do literature review. You just write your story depending on your information. But if you write academic manuscript, you need to actually do the very thorough review of the literature. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, sir. That's clear. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So let's move on to the next. All right. So now methods, right? So there are two things. One is analytical strategy for each question, right? So, and for your research questions, you may have a hypothesis, right? So when you do your analysis, so there is a link, should be linked between methods to analysis. That's what it means. You have the research methods or the analytical framework, and you are doing your analysis. They should be linked to each other. Okay, there should be a natural flow how you are moving from methods to analyzing your data. Okay, so you need to establish that at link. And when you analyze, you may be doing your testing hypothesis. If you're doing econometric analysis of your data. So for example, very simple hypothesis here, maternal education reduces diarrhea in slums. Very simple thing, right? And you may want to test it. collecting data from areas and then look at the relationship between maternal education and child diarrhea. If educated mothers have like a less episode of like, child diarrhea, and you can conclude, okay, yes, of course, mother's education actually helps reducing child diarrhea. Okay. And always reference your result to the literature. You find something and always compare. That's why literature review should go everywhere, not just a separate section. You refer to the existing body of literature and link what you found and compare or contrast with your results, what the existing literature says and what you found, right? So that your research becomes more meaningful. It can be contrasting, it can be confirming what is there already, okay? And also, you need to use multiple strategies to answer the question, okay? If you are using, for example, let's say econometrics. I don't know how many of you use econometrics, but let me tell this. If you're using econometrics for analyzing your data, don't rely on single model. You need to run multiple models to show that whatever you are doing comes consistently, no matter what model you're using. Only then your answer, your results can be trusted. If you change something and you get different results, your results are not robust to different methods, right? So you need to do a lot of robustness check in your paper when you analyze your data before writing. And that should be part of your writing also, how you actually test the robustness, how robust your results are. Okay? All right, let's move on. And also, like, in research, basically, causal inference is very, very important, right? So you need to discuss about what problems you are facing when you do your data analysis, okay? Is there any endogeneity issues? Do you know what is endogeneity issue?
Hello?
No, sir.
Anyone? Do you know what is endogeneity issue?
Hello?
No, sir.
Hello, sir. May I answer it?
Yes, please.
Sir, endogeneity issue arises when some relevant variable is not added in the equation. Suppose I'm doing a regression. I'm checking the relationship between the dependent and independent variable. And if the relevant variable lies within the error term, then the endogeneity issue will arise.
Okay, very good. That's the one region. The other one is like, reverse causality, right?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes.
So sometimes, so in economics, what we say is, the demand curve slows down. So when price is high, demand tends to be low, right? So what is your dependent variable and what is your independent variable there in demand, quantity and price? And why? Because, the price depends on how much people are buying, right? If there's a huge demand, the price also changes. And if you change price, people decide how much to buy, right? So price is affecting quantity demanded, and quantity demanded affecting price. So you don't know which is what is affecting what. So you cannot claim when price is increasing by 5%, demand is increasing by 10%, right? So there is an association between price and quantity demanded, but you don't know exactly which is causing what, okay? So those kind of issues always arise in research, and you need to explain how you are going to address that issue, okay? So OLS is ordinary least squares method. When you do that, you actually face these kind of challenges, endogeneity issues, all kind of things. So there are alternatives like instrumental variable, fixed effects, quasi-experimental design, regression discontinuity, synthetic control. These are like, going beyond your simple linear regression, okay? So if you are in that field, so always think of like, you start with OLS, of course, but don't in your paper there. Go beyond OLS and address some of these endogeneity issues. Okay? So that you can actually come up with the causal inference. You can show X is actually causing Y by 10% or 15% or 20%. Otherwise, it is difficult to attribute the relationship between X and Y. Okay? Questions on this causal inference? Of course, it takes like several semesters to teach. I'm just putting one slide here. So I don't expect you understand completely, but if you vaguely understand, okay, I should not be relying in one method, one equation, one regression. I need to go one after another. And I need to, if the results are staying the same, more or less statistically, no matter what you do, and then you can rely on your results. That's the idea. Okay? All right. So whenever you use a lot of equation, variables in your research, what you need to do is you need to discuss what are the key variables. Okay? Not just listing, but discussing them. What are the key variables and why? Okay? And to the extent possible, don't just write X1, X2, X3. Write their name like a price, quantity demanded, income, tax rate, kind of thing. If you name your variable that way, that helps the reader a lot. They don't have to go back, oh, what is X? X is price. After 5 pages, right? And you write Y and X1 and X2 and different definitions. That's a bit difficult for the research readers to follow your paper. So please write the actual name of the variable so that they don't have to go 5 pages back or front to know what the variable is, okay? And another thing is if you are putting things in table and text, maybe following, if you have multiple tables, follow the same order of the variables, same names, okay? All right. So regression tables, as I said, you should run like a lot of regressions, right? And if you have a lot of numbers, of course, you need to put results maybe in table. And then software actually gives you, results, maybe 5 decimal points, which you may not need. So you need to be very, very careful what is needed to make sense out of your numbers. So don't just dump whatever comes out from your software. You need to use your your own judgment. What is needed? What many decimal points? 1, 2, kind of thing. Okay. And you can always report multiple models in single tables so that people can actually compare your coefficients across different tables. So across different models. Okay. All right. So now, once you have everything, right, you now have like your research results in tabular form. Now you start writing, right? And you write your regression results. So what you need to do is focus on the main variables. You may be using 20 variables for your analysis, but you are looking at the relationship between 2 variables. Earlier, if you remember our example of deforestation, we are looking at 2 variables, right? One is the policy. If you change the policy and give the rights to the farmers as like the manager of the forest, meaning joint forest management, can that reduce deforestation rate? And you may have some indicators, of deforestation, maybe how much firewood they're collecting, right? You look at households collecting firewood in different types of forest management regimes, joint forest management, government managed forest, all kinds of things, and see if there's a difference between the management regimes of the forest and how much firewood they are collecting. And the rest of the variables are just the control variables. And you should not be discussing all 20 variables in your paper, okay? And always, when you get your result, when you write it up, link to the literature. What is the similarity between what you have done and what others have done in the similar context in other countries or in different parts of India, so you link with the literature, okay? And also cluster your results wherever possible, meaning you write your result as a theme, one theme in one paragraph, not one results and discuss in one paragraph. Okay, so the final discussion is, can you hear me? I saw some internet problem here, but I hope you're listening.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so final discussion in your research paper. So your structure is introduction, research methods, your data variable, how you collected the data, and after that, how you analyze your data, the analysis part, and now at the end you do your discussion, right? In your discussion, that can be your final concluding section where you can discuss. Sometimes people discuss in the result section itself, and sometimes people actually take that to the final conclusion section. Discussion and conclusion, you can add together, right? So basically, what you need to focus on is you need to summarize what are the key findings in your discussion. Before you discuss, you summarize the findings, and then discuss what is the key things that you found in your research. Okay, what is the bottom line of your paper? And also, do results follow other literature? Meaning, is it consistent with what the literature said? Is it consistent with what the theory predicted, right? Or you got some different results? And if you got different results, you need to discuss why you got different results. What could be the potential explanation? And also, what is the value addition of your research here? You need to just summarize any shortcoming of your work. If anybody wants to do research in the same area, what should they be focusing on? Okay, the shortcoming helps them to actually find out, what needs to be done. Okay, so any questions on this slide or anything that I said before? Questions, comments, suggestions?
Yes, sir.
Or you want to share something?
Yes, sir.
Anything?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Please.
सर, हम सब जो फाइंडिंग करते हैं, रिजल्ट लाते हैं, वो सब प्रीवियस पेपर को फॉलो करके लाती हैं, उसमें कुछ मॉडिफिकेशन या कुछ इम्प्रूवमेंट, ऐसा क्या हमको बैकग्राउंड को देखकर हमको रिसर्च करना पड़ेगा? कुछ नए हम नहीं ला सकते हैं जिसमें पूरा बिल्कुल गलत बना देंगे जो पिछले जो लिटरेचर में है, जो इक्वेशन में है, without following that equation, cannot we put another themes which not obey to the literature? जैसे मैं एग्जांपल दे सकता हूँ, आइंस्टाइन का पेपर में कोई रेफरेंस नहीं था. Can we publish a paper without reference?
Well, it's a very difficult question. If you are doing something groundbreaking, maybe you don't need any reference, right?
Yes,
like Einstein, he did groundbreaking work.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So it depends. If you think this is a groundbreaking thing, it doesn't need anything. It's a completely different discovery. Maybe you don't need any reference. And I'm not sure how many people do that actually, groundbreaking research, right? If you're doing something that has been explored already, that's why literature review is very important. So you need to establish that, nobody has done that before. To establish that, you need to review it and say nobody has done it, so this is groundbreaking. Okay?
Yes, sir. It is also not recommended by any prestigious professors from like Stanford and Oxford, because I do like this type of job. I asked one professor from Stanford who did it in their literatures, and I follow them. But when I get the miracle results, they unable to answer me.
Yeah, yeah,
still
sure,
I am-
sure.
Yes,
So
I am
if it is like a
working-
groundbreaking, other people may not understand what you're doing.
Yes, sir. Sir, perhaps they are thinking about that. They takes near about 3 years for me. And when I'm contacting several times, they are silent about that. Not answering that your method is wrong, your work is wrong, your results is not saying like that. Is just silent. When am I
So
asking
these
that,
days,
sir,
if you think, nobody is, publishing your result,
yes, sir. I am
so
now difficult
people
for
can
publishing.
actually self-publish these days, right?
Yes, sir. Sir, it is problem for me. How the reviewers will remark for my paper to publish? Perhaps I thinking that this paper may be rejected by the reviewers. I have the problems. I'm
I
suffering
don't have
with-
answer for that because I never think myself doing groundbreaking research.
It may
Okay.
be, sir. How I can say that this is groundbreaking when not anybody recognize me now? I'm problem. If
So
I'm
you need to
saying
look
somebody-
at, you need to look at, because it should be done like in a, some certain way, right? You should have some sort of like, a structure in your paper, and you should have like some sort of like, explanation why you are doing what you're doing, all kind of things. And as I said, writing a paper is telling a story, right?
Yes, sir.
So your story should be convincing and interesting.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So,
I'm
so you
narrated.
need to convince people why they are not convinced. So you need to put some effort to convince them. That lies, the burden lies on the researcher.
Yes,
How to convince other people on what you are doing. Okay.
sir. I'm staying in a limited sphere. I am not getting the scopes to elaborate my research or my themes, my aims in front of a large audience, because I'm staying in just a rural village. I'm staying in a schools. So nobody. I am getting.
So what is your area? Which discipline? Is it engineering? Is it computer science, economics,
Yes, sir.
medicine?
Yes, sir. I'm particularly working for the fuel cells catalyst.
What is it?
Fuel cells catalyst.
It's engineering, science?
Yes, you may consider as material engineering.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that may be something quite new. I don't know. So,
Yes, sir.
But good luck. That sounds very interesting.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So whenever you have your regression results, basically, people put in tables. Okay. But you need to be very careful. Is the, whatever table you're putting is useful to tell the story? Is that needed to answer your questions? Sometimes you might have like 20 tables and need to decide, maybe the journal actually takes 3 tables. So you need to be very, very selective what is actually needed. And these days, because of this internet, all kind of things, you can put a lot of things in the supplementary materials that goes online, separate from your paper, but linking with that, and people can, whoever is needed, they can look at it. Okay, so there are ways of like how to actually make it very short paper. And then if you put things in the table, you need to discuss information from the tables, and always like, as I said earlier here, the numbers, reporting numbers, don't report too many decimals places. Maybe 1 is enough. 0.6 is not much difference from 0.589, unless, it is very, 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 I don't know what you're measuring with that precision, right? So you need to very careful about how much precision you need for that particular estimates, okay? And decide your decimal places. And also think about, is the table represented better if you put in a graph? For example, here. So here you can see we ran like 4 different regression models. And these are the key coefficients of 4 models. Instead of showing very long table with 4 columns, so one graph is actually giving you all the information that is needed. It gives you the mean estimates, also the 95% confidence interval, and the sign, everything is given in the graph. So think about putting your research results into graphs of different types. Okay. And also the tables may be very complicated like this. So this is a lot of numbers here. And you need to think whether you need to present your information this way, or is there any better way of presenting your information? So this is an art actually, okay? So you have the information, but how to actually present very effectively is a challenge every researcher will face, including yourself and myself and everybody, okay? You can always show things in graph. That is very clear actually here, this is percent of households cultivating seasons after Ayla, which is a hurricane in Sundarbans. Okay, so initially increasing after 2010, sort of a leveling off. About the yield, what is happening, increasing a little bit in every this round of survey. All right. So conclusion and policy recommendation, your final summarize main findings again, emphasize critical results, present very key numbers only in your final section so that people remember what your results were, the key results. Highlight the main value addition of your paper. And also if you have, just recommend something. If you have policy recommendations, just provide there, okay? And also any remaining issues, and be very, very sharp there. Don't recommend things that you never analyzed in a paper, okay? So recommendations should be coming from the direct analysis. If you learn something from your analysis, and then you can recommend. Otherwise, don't even talk about that things there, okay? So I already said recommendations should flow from your work. And recommendation for social science is I don't know, in physical science, I saw a lot of a patchy voice, but social scientists actually like to read in active voice, okay? Instead of saying it is recommended by the study, you can directly say the study recommends X, Y, Z, okay? And no moderate recommendation, meaning government should educate the poor. Everybody knows it, and you don't have to do research for this, right? So don't plug in those things in a recommendation, which is very obvious. And it should come from your research. And if something is very obvious, nobody does research, right, for obvious things. Okay? And again, I said numbers used very, very, very effectively. And since, whatever you do becomes available globally, try to use international this conversion in brackets. If you have some numbers, some money, kind of something like that, that differs from country to country, right? 100 rupees in Nepal is different from 100 rupees in India by exchange rate. So if you can convert to USD, that is common, right? So some sort of things so that readers can feel very comfortable reading and drawing some insights from your research, okay? Use acronyms like a short forms. We are very fond of using acronyms in our research, but this is actually should be discouraged unless this is very, very known to everybody, like IPCC, UN, all kind of things. Everybody knows what those are, right? Otherwise, don't use it. Write the full. If it is very long, like 5-7 words, and then you should write your short form, but first define it, okay? And in your writing, control your tone when you write. For example, my method is superior than the existing literature. Don't say that, right? Your method can be different, but don't say it is superior. Don't be partial, or don't take side already, or something pre-decided. For example, BT cotton has been largely misunderstood by policymakers, right? So you are just making some sort of a bias statement here. So as a researcher, you need to be very impartial in your approach, and tone also when you write, okay? So also don't use must qualifiers. We try to use a lot of qualifiers, right? Most things aren't very interesting, and this is very critical kind of thing, right? So this is extremely high. So what is extremely high? High is high, and you need to define how high is high, right? And I also say, you know, this is one of its kinds, my research is path-breaking. These kind of qualifiers, unless it is truly path-breaking, don't use it in your writing. People don't like, you know, like to see these kind of things because you may not know what is done already in other parts of the world or in other countries. So that's the role of literature review. Okay, even if you do review, you always miss a lot of relevant things. You cannot possibly do